I do love the fact that it is the Clooneys that are now delivering Harry and Meghan a taste of their own medicine. They're being ghosted. See how it feels? Not very nice, is it? But incredibly well deserved.
Something has changed. And if the latest reports and royal watcher speculation are even remotely accurate, Prince Harry may have just learned one of the hardest lessons in Hollywood. Because when George Clooney speaks, people listen. And when George Clooney stops speaking altogether, people start asking questions. For years, George and Amal Clooney were seen as some of the most influential names connected to Harry and Meghan's post-royal world. They attended the royal wedding. They were linked to private vacations. George even publicly defended Meghan during one of the most difficult periods of media scrutiny she faced. So what happened? Why does a friendship that once looked untouchable now appear almost invisible? Why have the public appearances vanished? Why has the support gone quiet? And why are royal commentators suddenly pointing to one particular statement and one particular decision as evidence that something changed behind the scenes? Tonight, we're diving deep into the mystery that has royal watchers, Hollywood insiders, and social media detectives connecting that may or may not belong on the same page. Was this simply a friendship that faded over time? A calculated Hollywood distancing? Or is there a much bigger story hiding beneath years of silence? Because the deeper you look into the Clooney connection, the stranger the timeline becomes. And if the speculation is true, Harry and Meghan may have never seen it coming. To understand why this story has suddenly exploded again, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to 2018. Back to the wedding that seemed to bring together two completely different worlds. At the time, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle weren't just getting married. They were becoming a global phenomenon. Every camera was pointed in their direction. Every headline was about them. Every celebrity wanted to know what came next. And then people noticed something interesting. Among the famous faces sitting inside the ceremony were George and Amal Clooney. Now, that raised eyebrows immediately. Not because they weren't important enough to be there. Quite the opposite. The Clooneys were already operating at a level of influence that few celebrity couples could match. George was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Amal was known internationally for her legal and humanitarian work. Together, they represented a combination of fame, prestige, power, and credibility, which led to one question. How close were they really? At the time, nobody seemed interested in asking. The wedding was a fairy tale. The headlines were positive. The public mood was optimistic. The assumption was simple. Harry and Meghan had arrived in a social circle most people could only dream about entering. Then came the reports of private gatherings, luxury vacations, exclusive invitations, and perhaps most famously, stories linking the Sussexes to George Clooney's famous Lake Como property in Italy. Whether every detail reported over the years was accurate or not, the perception was clear. These weren't random acquaintances anymore. At least, that's how it appeared from the outside. Then came 2019. And this is where things became especially significant. Because when Meghan faced increasing media scrutiny, George Clooney didn't stay silent. He spoke. Publicly. Directly. At a moment when many celebrities were carefully avoiding involvement, Clooney stepped forward and defended her. That mattered. Not only because of who he was, but because of what his support symbolized. For Harry and Meghan, it looked like proof that powerful people were willing to stand beside them. For critics, it was evidence that Hollywood's elite had chosen a side. And for observers watching the entire situation unfold, it seemed to confirm that this friendship wasn't merely ceremonial. It looked real, solid, the kind of relationship that would survive headlines and controversy. But then something strange happened. Nothing. No dramatic argument. No public disagreement. No explosive interview. No shocking social media exchange. Just silence. The kind of silence that doesn't arrive all at once. The kind that grows slowly. One missed appearance becomes 2. One missing photograph becomes 10. 1 year passes. Then another. And before anyone notices, people who once seemed connected stop appearing in the same story altogether. Royal commentators began pointing out the pattern. Where were the joint appearances? Where were the public acknowledgements? Where were the signs of an active friendship? The questions kept multiplying. especially after Harry and Meghan relocated to California. Because if there was ever a moment when these relationships should have become more visible, surely that was it. Hollywood was now their backyard. The entertainment industry was no longer an occasional destination. It was home. Yet strangely, the public evidence of this once-discussed friendship appeared to shrink rather than expand. And that's where the mystery truly begins. Because friendships end all the time. Nobody finds that unusual. But when a friendship once linked to royal weddings, global headlines, private retreats, and public support seems to fade without explanation, people naturally start looking for answers. Were observers reading too much into normal life changes? Did distance simply do what distance always does? Or had something happened behind closed doors that nobody was willing to discuss publicly? The deeper commentators dug into the timeline, the more intriguing the story became. And according to many royal watchers, the next chapter would raise even bigger questions than the first. And that brings us to the moment many royal commentators still point to when discussing this entire mystery. Because while nobody can say with certainty what happened behind closed doors, there was one public development that immediately got people talking. The King's Trust Awards. On the surface, it looked completely ordinary. A prestigious event, high-profile guests, charitable causes, influential figures moving through the kind of circles they have always moved through. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. And yet, within hours, royal watchers were dissecting every image, every appearance, and every possible implication. Why? Because by this point, Harry and Meghan's relationship with the royal institution had become one of the most talked about stories in the world. The Oprah interview had generated global headlines. The Netflix project had sparked endless debate. The memoir had triggered weeks of controversy. Every new chapter seemed to create another round of public discussion.
Breaking today, shocking new details have emerged about why George and Amal Clooney ditched Prince Harry and Meghan Markle.
And right in the middle of all that noise, George and Amal Clooney appeared perfectly comfortable attending an event connected to King Charles's charitable work. Was it a message? Was it a statement? Was it a deliberate choice? Nobody knows. But that didn't stop the internet from creating theories at record speed. Social media exploded with speculation. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Some people argued the appearance meant absolutely nothing. Others insisted it meant everything. And suddenly a question started appearing everywhere. If the friendship was still as strong as people once believed, why did it seem so invisible? The timing only added fuel to the fire. Because this wasn't happening during a quiet period. This was happening while Harry and Meghan remained at the center of one of the most heavily discussed celebrity stories on the planet, which made the silence even louder. Think about it. Back in 2019, George Clooney publicly defended Meghan when many others stayed quiet. Years later, during some of the biggest Sussex headlines ever, that same public support wasn't visible. No dramatic speeches, no interviews, and public declarations. Nothing. And in the world of celebrity culture, silence can become a story all by itself. The internet noticed. Royal commentators noticed. Even entertainment reporters started asking questions. Not because anyone had evidence of a feud, but because the contrast was impossible to ignore. The friendship once generated headlines. Now the absence of that friendship was generating headlines. And then came another uncomfortable observation. People started looking back at the famous 2018 wedding guest list. One name, then another, then another. As they did, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the celebrity relationships that once seemed central to the Sussex story were no longer appearing in the same way they once had. Again, that doesn't automatically mean conflict. People drift apart, lives change, careers evolve. But from a public relations perspective, the optics were difficult to ignore. The image of an unstoppable Hollywood power network no longer looked as clear as it once had. And that's when some royal insiders and commentators began floating a theory that would dominate discussion for months. What if the biggest challenge facing Harry and Meghan wasn't criticism from opponents? What if it was something much harder to fight? What if it was simple indifference? Because controversy creates headlines. Arguments create headlines. Public feuds create headlines. But when influential people quietly move on without explanation, that creates a mystery. And mysteries have a habit of becoming much bigger than the facts themselves, which is exactly where this story was heading next. Because according to growing speculation, the questions surrounding the Clooneys were about to become even more uncomfortable, and this is where the story takes its most fascinating turn. Because after years of speculation, royal watchers stopped focusing on what George and Amal Clooney were doing. Instead, they started focusing on what they weren't doing. And according to many commentators, that distinction may be the most revealing detail of all.
Think about it.
When celebrities are genuinely close, the signs usually appear naturally. They attend the same events. They congratulate each other publicly. They mention each other in interviews. Their names continue appearing in the same headlines. It doesn't require a public relations campaign. It just happens. Yet when observers looked at the situation surrounding the Clooneys and the Sussexes, they struggled to find those signals. The relationship that once looked like one of the strongest celebrity alliances connected to Harry and Meghan had become increasingly difficult to see. And that reality sparked an even bigger conversation. What does Hollywood value more than almost anything else? Stability, predictability, carefully managed reputations. The biggest names in entertainment spend years building brands that can survive changing trends, shifting politics, and endless media cycles. Which is why some commentators began suggesting that the issue was never about friendship at all. It was about risk. Again, there is no public evidence that George or Amal Clooney ever made such a calculation. But the theory spread quickly. The argument was simple. As the Sussex story became increasingly controversial, every public association suddenly carried more attention than before. Every appearance generated headlines. Every interaction created analysis. Every photograph became a news story. And for people who carefully manage global reputations, that level of scrutiny can become exhausting. Whether fair or unfair, that became part of the conversation. Then came another uncomfortable observation. The California chapter that was supposed to represent limitless opportunity had not unfolded exactly as many people expected. Back in 2020, the narrative seemed unstoppable. Harry and Meghan were entering Hollywood. New projects were coming. Powerful connections were everywhere. The future appeared enormous. But several years later, commentators began asking whether the reality matched the expectation. Because while some partnerships succeeded, others appeared less visible than originally predicted. Some relationships remained strong. Others seemed to fade into the background. And suddenly people were looking back at the Clooney connection as a symbol of something larger. Not just one friendship. An entire expectation. The expectation that Hollywood would automatically replace everything left behind. The expectation that celebrity circles would become a permanent foundation. The expectation that influence naturally creates loyalty. But Hollywood has always operated according to its own rules. Today's headline can become tomorrow's forgotten story. Today's closest connection can become tomorrow's distant acquaintance. And perhaps that's why this mystery continues generating so much attention. Not because anyone knows exactly what happened, but because nobody does. There was no dramatic ending, no explosive interview, no public confrontation, no shocking confession. Just a friendship that appeared highly visible one moment and increasingly invisible the next. And sometimes those are the stories people find hardest to explain, because human beings naturally search for causes. We want a reason, a turning point, a secret meeting, a hidden disagreement, something that neatly explains everything.
Because you can just imagine, Tash, they are really the ones that tend to ghost people. So the fact that they are now being ghosted is really interesting to me.
Yet years later, no such explanation has emerged, which leaves only speculation. And that speculation continues growing. Was this simply a normal friendship that ran its course? Did distance and busy schedules gradually change the relationship? Did public controversies make certain associations less attractive? Or are people reading far too much into a situation that may be far less dramatic than the headlines suggest? Nobody outside the people involved can answer those questions with certainty. But one thing is undeniable. The contrast between 2019 and today is impossible for many observers to ignore. Back then, George Clooney was publicly defending Meghan in front of cameras. Today, royal commentators are debating what his silence means, and whether that silence tells a bigger story than any statement ever could. Because sometimes the loudest message in Hollywood isn't what gets said, it's what stops being said. And in a world built on visibility, attention, and influence, disappearing from the picture can become the biggest headline of all. Which is exactly why this story refuses to go away. And why people are still asking the same question years later. What really happened between the Clooneys and Harry and Meghan? The truth may be known only to the people involved. But until that answer arrives, the mystery remains very much alive. So after everything we've gone through tonight, one question still hangs over this entire story. What really happened? Because no matter how many headlines appear, no matter how many royal commentators offer theories, and no matter how many social media detectives claim they've solved the mystery, the truth is that nobody outside the people involved knows exactly why one of the most talked about celebrity friendships of the post-royal era appears to have faded from public view. And maybe that's exactly why people can't stop talking about it. Think about the timeline. A royal wedding watched around the world. Luxury getaways. Public support during difficult moments. A friendship that seemed stronger than most celebrity relationships ever become. And then, silence. Not a scandal, not a public feud, not a dramatic Hollywood fallout. Just silence. The kind of silence that leaves people filling in the blanks themselves. Was this a calculated decision by the Clooneys? Did years of controversy gradually change the dynamic? Or did the world simply assume a friendship was much deeper than it actually was? That's the question nobody can seem to answer. But here's what's impossible to ignore. The people who once appeared closest to Harry and Meghan are no longer generating the same public picture they once did. And whether that's meaningful or completely normal depends entirely on how you read the evidence. Now we want to hear from you. If you had to choose just one explanation, which theory makes the most sense? Was this a natural drift? A Hollywood recalibration? Or is there still a missing piece of the puzzle that hasn't been revealed yet? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this debate is far from over, and some of the most interesting theories always come from viewers like you. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most talked about royal mysteries on the internet, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next explosive story. Because in the world of royalty, celebrity power, and behind-the-scenes influence, today's mystery can become tomorrow's headline without warning. And trust us, this story may not be over yet. We'll be watching for the next twist. And when it arrives, you'll hear it here first.